I'm Alex and this is Lois, and we've been working as aid workers in South Sudan for the last 2 years, where the reality of every day is mingled with pain and suffering.
Thinking about suffering is never easy because we all suffer in some way at some time. It's common to our humanity.
So we will all struggle with suffering, pain and evil. Wrestling with them forces us to confront some deep questions that help us to live deeper, richer lives. Wherever we are, at some point we will come face to face with it.
Throughout 2015, in one of the most war-torn areas of South Sudan, people were being driven from their land. Women were raped, young girls were abducted. There were incidents where groups of soldiers couldn't decide on who would be able to attack somebody first, and so instead they killed them. People's cattle were taken, crops were destroyed, huts were burnt, and people were brutally killed.
And a friend of mine's sister died in a car crash. He said to me that it's impossible to articulate the pain that he felt, but he said he felt it was like losing his own life. Wherever we are in the world, we look around and we see pain, we see evil, we see suffering. There are wars, there are natural disasters, there are random events that happen to really good people. And so it's natural that we ask ourselves, why do these things happen? But what's really important is that we approach the question in the right way.
A word of warning, we're not going to get to the point of having a nice, neat answer on this one. If you're looking for a neatly packaged answer, you're probably asking the wrong questions. Whatever your view on things, it matters how you ask the question. So when we come to approach this question, it's important that we're looking for a practical outcome rather than a neatly packaged and purely philosophical answer. We want to come to a conclusion that deals with the beauty and pain that we're surrounded by and enables us to live with joy and maturity in the midst of the tension that we face. Evil and suffering are not a logic problem to be solved, but a reality to grapple with. If you speak to somebody who has lost a loved one in an accident or witnessed the devastation of a natural disaster, they don't want a disinterested and academic answer. They want something that enables them to live. Most answers to the question of evil and suffering fall somewhere on a spectrum. At one end, the idea that suffering isn't real. At the other, the idea that suffering is all there is. A good conclusion would be one that affirms the reality of suffering, but also accepts that it's not the ultimate or final truth of the world in which we live. So, turning to the Christian story, to what extent do we find that? Does it affirm that evil is real? And does it point to something that is truer and deeper than suffering?
Like all good stories, we should start in the beginning. But before we start the story, it's important to know where, when and why the story was written. The book of Genesis was written when the Israelites were living in captivity in around about 1500 BC, and it was their attempt to make sense of the world around them. In this story, we're told that creation is good but incomplete. We're told that there is a separation, a rupture deep in the heart of things. This separation exists between God and human beings, between people, within people, and it also says that the very essence of the physical world has this separation too. In short, things aren't as they were meant to be, and we hit the nail on the head when we feel that things are wrong. All things are created good, but evil is woven into them. The story of the Bible is of a God who works within the world, through people, to overcome evil.
This story reaches its culmination in the person of Jesus, a Jewish teacher who claimed that he was God. The accounts recording the story of Jesus' life are unique in all of the world's great literature, religious theories and philosophies. The story of a creator God taking responsibility for the world's problems and bearing that full responsibility on his own shoulders. The ultimate demonstration of this responsibility was in the death and resurrection of Jesus, an event that the biblical writers said had cosmic repercussions. They said that because of what happened to Jesus, the process of things being reconciled back to God had begun. And they said that one day, that process would be complete and the world would be perfect once more.
This might sound just like a bunch of ancient stories with no relevance to the 21st century, but can it help us make some firm conclusions to help us deal with suffering? Looking at these stories, we learn that the world is not as God wants it to be, but that He is working within it to bring about its healing, so that one day it will be fully as He intends it.
We learn that God is not a divine puppet master pulling the strings to make people happy or miserable on a whim, but rather He is present with people in their suffering.
We learn that God Himself knew what it meant to suffer, and that He suffered the most grievous physical, spiritual, emotional and psychological pain. He grieved as those He cared for died, and He wept as He saw the suffering of His friends. And as He hung on the cross, the full weight of the world's pain and evil and suffering was concentrated upon Him in that moment.
We learn that this story doesn't deny that suffering is real, but equally that suffering is not the ultimate truth. There is something more than suffering, not only crucifixion but also resurrection. This is God's transforming radical work within the world to one day permanently end suffering, that love ultimately wins. If right now you're going through a difficult time, it's probable that this doesn't sound particularly helpful, and it isn't a quick fix answer. What it does do is provide a framework within which you can interact with the world that takes suffering seriously but doesn't give it the final say.
In closing, we want to share a few stories of the conclusions reached by some friends of ours who've been through great suffering. A friend of ours in South Sudan, who'd witnessed some of the most awful things that you could imagine, came to the conclusion in a letter that he wrote to us, and he said, "I'm convinced that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God." This is someone who has witnessed some of the most grievous atrocities I have ever heard about, arguing that the love of God is deeper and truer and more real than the evil he has witnessed. My friend whose sister died in a car crash wrote this to me. "Through all this, love has become the closest thing to truth to me. It's like a natural law. I've seen and experienced so much true love in my life from those closest to me, but I think I was only able to internalize it on this level after all the distractions were removed. God is love resonates more than anything I've ever heard, read, or experienced."
The hope we have is that whatever suffering we face, we have a God who will never leave us, who understands us and our suffering and has experienced such suffering himself. This is the story of God's costly, loving collaboration to reunite humankind with himself. This isn't a quick fix or a tidy answer or a philosophical proof. It is the answer God gave us to suffering, Jesus.